I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
So I thought what we wanted to do is just I'm going to read an article and then we're just going to talk a little and then just open it up to a general discussion about I think people are really looking for ways of how to move forward in this kind of apolitical world in the United States. I actually think we're very apolitical. So this is my article. Do I need this? This thing is like, all right. I'll do this for the audio. Why President-elect Barack Obama is not the first hip-hop president. Each generation out of relative obscurity must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. Frantz Fanon said that. It has been 45 days since the hip-hop generation helped usher in the first black male president of the United States of America. Since that historic night, many within hip-hop culture, like writer Greg Kot of the Boston Globe, entrepreneur Russell Simmons, artists Common, Jay-Z, and P. Diddy, have declared President-elect Obama the first hip-hop president. In my humble opinion, they are wrong, dead wrong. It does not matter how many hip-hop pundits, nonprofit organizations, academics, or recognizable figures within the culture declare it. Much like an MC or a B-girl battle, I'm ready to challenge that declaration. As a longtime community organizer and hip-hop activist and journalist, I have always followed one rule. Never allow someone to become your priority while you become his or her option. For President-elect Barack Obama and the entire Democratic Party leadership in this country, the hip-hop generation has never been a priority. We have always been an option, and that option is used mostly to get out the vote during elections. Efforts like Vote or Die, Generation Vote, Rock the Vote, Respect My Vote do nothing to empower generation. They are catchy slogans emblazoned on pretty white tees that offer empty rhetoric. At the end of the day, these GOTV efforts become guaranteed votes for the Democratic Party and often fail to educate their followers about candidates that run outside of the two-party system. I believe that, like many before him, President-elect Barack Obama's campaign used hip-hop to help build excitement amongst young people in this country. But we must clearly see through the 750 million bling-bling marketing haze of his campaign. The few times he was pressed on his association to hip-hop, he spoke about offensive rap lyrics and black men having respect for themselves by pulling up their pants. I do not recall one specific mention of the political victories and social consciousness brought out by millions in the culture. Just because you brush off your shoulders, fist bump the future First Lady, or play a mean game of street ball, to me that does not make you hip-hop. What we now have is an Obama administration that came into power with the promise of change, but is remixing that promise by sampling from the Bill Clinton presidency, including Hillary herself. And this new remix will do nothing to change the mass material conditions of our people. In Van Jones's new book, The Green Collar Economy, Van says, "It is time to change from fighting against something to fighting for something." For me, that statement encapsulates why I chose to accept Cynthia McKinney's invitation to be her running mate and why the Green Party made history by choosing us as the first woman of color ticket in American presidential politics. I accepted the call because I was no longer interested in fighting against the Democratic or Republican Party. I'm more interested in fighting for a hip-hop political movement not dominated by academics, white liberal politics, or white foundation money. I want to fight for a hip-hop political movement that is African-centered, respects women as leaders, and believes in universal health care. A hip-hop movement that fights for amnesty for undocumented immigrants and ends the prison industrial complex. We must all fight for a hip-hop political movement that wants to be at peace with our global brothers and sisters and that will build a truly independent media apparatus. We need a hip-hop political movement that will stand up and mobilize against the increasing racial violence against Latino and brown immigrants, and one that demands a livable wage. We need a hip-hop movement that is not afraid to say that the Palestinian people should have the full right of return and that the Israeli occupation of their homeland is illegal. I need hip-hop to affirm the right of the Puerto Rican people and my island to be an independent nation. And I want hip-hop to free all of our political prisoners and prisoners of war. We need hip-hop to end the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, to end the death penalty, and we must now create a hip-hop political movement that empowers working-class people and that will never deny LGBTI brothers and sisters all their God-given human rights. Finally, I want hip-hop to uplift and support its women, to accept us as women of color as capable, much-needed leaders, and to understand that as long as hip-hop continues to deny women their much-fought place in this culture, hip-hop will die. So this is what I'm fighting for. For me, it's not about holding Obama, the House of Representatives, or the United States accountable. Holding public officials accountable is important, but building a multiracial working-class people's movement is now a necessity for our very existence. So yes, hip-hop. President-elect Barack Obama may be the first black president, but he is not the first hip-hop president. Only we, the people of hip-hop, can one day make that a reality. So I wrote that right after President Barack Obama, and I think like 2 years later, it definitely speaks to where we're at as a people. And I don't ever deny the article. I wish I was harder, actually, in the article, you know, but yeah, so Jared, you want me to kind of talk and then you, okay.
I mean, it's cool, whatever.
Yeah,
I'm
so,
just wanted to plug that in. So.
Yeah, so, you know, I think it's, wow, it's been over almost 3 years since me and Cynthia got the nomination. It'll be 3 years in July. So I'll just say this. I'll talk for like 5 to 7 minutes. Okay. So my name is Rosa Clemente. I was born in the Bronx, and I'm in the Bronx now. I live in Soundview and on Rosedale. I grew up in the Bronx, and then for 10 years I grew up in Westchester County. So I had a very interesting childhood experience because we grew up in this rich suburb, but every weekend I was in the hood, you know, with my family, and always grounded in that way. And I went to SUNY Albany. I got my master's at Cornell in the Africana Studies and Research Center. I did my thesis on the Young Lords Party. And really, since I was an undergrad at the State University of New York at Albany, where my first kind of foray into activism was the budget cuts that were taking place when we took over Governor Pataki's mansion. Like, we took over the mansion and destroyed the Capitol by breaking windows and things like that, because they were trying to raise our tuition from $675 a semester at SUNY to $900. And now it's $5,000 or some crazy amount to go to SUNY schools. So that was how I got into activism. How I got into hip-hop activism, I mean, I grew up in the Bronx. Of course, I'm a hip-hop baby. But this idea of hip-hop activism, which was coined by Harry Allen, but also we have the fifth element of hip-hop, which to me is the most misunderstood element of the culture and the one that nobody talks about. Like, when I talk about hip-hop, that's rap music. That's an element. I don't like when people like hip-hop, you know, Jay-Z is hip-hop. He's a great rapper. And, you know, I don't see him partaking in the other elements. So I think it's important when we talk about hip-hop that we acknowledge that fifth element, knowledge, culture, and politics, as well as journalism, is the reason the culture maintains and it sustains and it goes through its ebbs and flows. But obviously, as a political person, and not just around voting is electoral politics, you know, I think we're at a very interesting juncture right now within hip-hop politics, and I think it now necessitates that people who want to particularly engage in the fifth element, which, let me say, I think is beginning to include academics and how the academy is, in a way, co-opting hip-hop. You know, you got like white kids teaching hip-hop, never been to the Bronx. You got black people teaching hip-hop, never even went to the Bronx. You're like, what are you talking about, dude? Like, at least go visit the place. You're at NYU and you've never been to Bronx River Projects, or you don't know what's going on with Cool Herc or Sedgwick Avenue. Like, the reason you have your job is because of these cats and the foundation in the Bronx. But it's a time now within, like, I feel like I always have to say I'm a hip-hop radical, because now that there's hip-hop Republicans, and now that there's hip-hop people who love capitalism to the destruction of our people, I have to, like, say, I'm working class, I'm poor, I'm hip-hop radical. I don't want to be associated with that hip-hop. The way I came into that was in 2001 we were preparing for this big conference, the UN Conference Against World Racism in South Africa, right? And Conrad Muhammad, who's now renamed himself to Conrad, or he took back his non-Muslim name, Conrad Tilliard, was having a lot of events in Harlem around like hip hop as politics and this. It's also a time period where I think the hip hop movement was at a zenith around fighting the prison industrial complex and bringing light to political prisoners. And there was this big article in the Village Voice, and Russell Simmons said, well, that dude's not hip hop. And I was like, well, dude, you're not hip hop, because you're getting your clothes made in sweatshop farms, and you like diamonds, and you're a multimillionaire with your white girlfriends and your yoga and all that. You're not hip hop. So I wrote an article called Russell Simmons is Not Hip Hop. And I went in on that dude. But I didn't only go in on Russell, I went in on the at that moment I could see from my history, from what I've been taught, particularly in Black and Puerto Rican studies, as a nationalist, I could see where it was going. It was going the route of soon to be in the academy, and then people can't access the archives, or you're gonna have hip hop classes and no Black people be teaching it, or, because that has happened in our history around Black studies, women's studies, ethnic studies. And it became a big deal. I think first because it was Russell Simmons. Like, how dare anybody say anything about Russell Simmons, And second, I think it was just honest. It was honest, and it struck people. It struck him to the point where he banned me from being able to come to his events, and actually called me into a meeting with him where we spoke. And I was like, dude, you're Russell Simmons. Like, what is Rosa Clemente doing to you? What that did for me is show me the power of the pen. Right? And it's also 2000, as silly as it sounds. Remember, there was like no MySpace or Facebook yet. There was no Twitter. Not a lot of people even had cell phones. And Davey D, who has DaveyD.com, which I think is, for any archivist or any historical, I think Davey has probably documented our political history the most. He called and was like, let me put this on my website. And it just made the rounds. So that's how I fell into this like world of hip hop activism, which would then lead me to meet Bakari, who I knew already from my relationship in Black Studies. He was at Third World Press and had been the editor of The Source. And coming back from South Africa, it was an amazing time to be in South Africa with over 100,000 people all over the world. But I also came back and I landed on September 11th as the second World Trade Center was falling in New York. I literally was landing. We were the last plane. And it just struck me at that moment the power that hip-hop had worldwide. I had gone out to South Africa with Dead Prez and within the Black August delegation, which I could speak more about. And to be in South Africa with 10,000 Africans in Soweto singing I'm an African, or them telling us how the U.S. imperialism was on its way down. It was pretty incredible. So I landed that day, and from that moment I got thrust into this world of hip-hop activism. But once the convention fell apart, and I can speak to that if people have questions, I think Bakari and the brothers leave out the fact that one of the main reasons the convention fell apart was the sexism and misogyny within the convention that pushed almost every woman out. By the time the convention happened, I was the only woman left on the steering committee because the bullshit was just too much from a lot of these brothers. It was just horrific. That would subsequently lead me to doing a lot of work and Cynthia calling me. And when we accepted the nomination, really, the reason I accepted the nomination was, first, I haven't been a Democrat for a long time. So I see these things as very unemotional. Like, I don't understand why we are like addicted to the Democratic Party. They do nothing for us at all. But I hadn't been a Democrat for a long time. I was already supporting Jared. Jared was actually running for president on the Green Party ticket, or going through the primary process. And then we heard Cynthia was going to be in it, and then Cynthia called me and asked me, and I was like, hell yeah, because these cats are destroying hip-hop. And the second reason was to be able to make a nomination speech that would be a hip-hop speech. So my speech was all about hip hop. It was about what we want as a people, our political agenda, how we can get that, and really to try to build a third party movement. Now, 3 years later, there's a lot of things that have happened that haven't facilitated what I envisioned, which is building a truly, not third party, but a true independent thinking within hip hop politics. But I'm hoping we get there, and that's why I think it's very important to have an ideology in hip hop, especially a political one. Whether you're a DJ and that's all you're ever gonna do, there's gonna be a reason why that white boy, Mark Ronson, is gonna get a gig before you get a gig, right? In the B-girl, B-boy world, there's a reason why, you know, the Lincoln Times now has a hip-hop conservatory of dance, but there's no people of color in it. And I went and spoke to those kids 4 weeks ago, and it was all white kids from all over the world. There's a reason why graffiti is illegal for any one of us to tag up, but yet it could be put on a perfume bottle and sold for $175 from Donna Karen's perfume line. So, like, to me, I tell artists and DJs, everything's political. There's a reason you're not getting that gig and that dude's getting that gig. There's a reason that is not trickling down to what you're doing, and you're out there as an artist suffering, doing the real work within hip hop, but you're not gonna get, not that shine that you wanna be all egocentric, but more, you wanna survive on your craft. And you should be able to survive in a craft that is $1 billion plus capitalist industry. So to not have a politic is, to me, not being hip hop. So that's my line.
All right.
Yeah. Let me see how long. No, I wanted to make sure it was 8 minutes. I wanted to keep it.
Very good. Okay, so I got to.
No, you have more time.
No. I want to have a discussion anyway. Good evening, good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be on the panel with my good comrade and sister Rosa. And to be here with all of you. It's an honor always to be able to engage with folks and put your work to the test, so to speak. I fundamentally agree with pretty much everything Rosa said. I'll just share with you a little bit of my own political approach, and then again, we can have a nice discussion. You know, a lot of people have talked about hip-hop as a deracialized entity, and I've always had a sort of a problem with that. That hip-hop is some sort of separate entity from the people who originated it, who are its progenitors and primary practitioners. So I don't like to discuss hip-hop as some sort of separate and distinct entity, separate and distinct from the people who created it. It is an African world expression. It comes out of the colonized experience of African and Latin American people, of working class people here in the United States, and it maintains that relationship to this day. So when we hear people talk about, this phrase "hip hop nation" a lot, it's something I've been reading and hearing people talk about for quite a while. One of the questions that I'm encouraged to ask is, well, if hip hop is indeed a nation, where is the nationalism within it? Number one, and secondly, as a nation, if hip hop is a nation, then we have to look at it in the ways we would have to look at any internally colonized nation, a nation within a nation subsumed within a nation that is itself hostile to it, or better yet, and I was recently corrected by on this issue by Natsu Saito, a brilliant legal indigenous woman and legal scholar, who has made the point that it's really not nations versus nations. The United States is actually a collective of nations subsumed and colonized within a state apparatus that is here to crush and destroy nations. There's a difference between a state and a nation. So when we look at this, again, I like to revive this internal colonial theory that I think is still applicable in sort of the social sciences and the academy and liberal politics is sort of pushed to the side over the last 30 years. But so when Rosa mentions Frantz Fanon and I wear George Jackson on my shirt, these are two people who represented a wing of thought that described and focused on the issue of colonization and imperialism. And particularly, and both men actually, along with several other women, most notably that I can recall, historically Claudia Jones, have argued that Black America, Latin America, is an internally colonized nation within the United States. And once you establish that basis, then you have to apply the principle and see how its cultural expression will be treated, how its political expression will be treated, and I think we see the manifestation of just that kind of treatment. So by that, very quickly, what I mean is that if we look at the conditions, despite all of the pretense to change over the last 40 or 50 years, we still look at the social indicators and we see pretty much exactly what an internally colonized nation or community would look like. De facto segregation, public schools, particularly in this city and where I'm familiar with in Washington, D.C., where I was born, and in Baltimore, where I work, you have public school segregation at rates that we've seen since or as high as the 1950s, 90+% segregation rates. Certainly the communities are the average white community is a white community. It's spatially separate, de facto, in a de facto sense, segregated. There's no official law anymore. But I remember that story actually when it came out when former Supreme Court Justice William Rehnquist was retiring before he died, and there was a story in the Washington Post about how he actually lived in a house that had as actually written into its contract that you could not sell it to a black or brown person. And I just remember thinking, well, they went as far as to write it. Usually they just say, they don't say no niggers and spics. They just say the rent is now $5,000 a month, and then everybody, well, okay, we just know you can't be here. But it's the same basic relationship. And if we look at over the last 40, 50 years, we see an actual decline or the most minor, what could be called progress in, again, the key indicators of employment, income, relationship, particularly earnings compared to whites and so on and so forth. We saw the study that came out last year that said women of color have a average net worth or median net worth of $5 as opposed to, I think, it was something like $60,000 for white women in the same category, something wildly disparate like that. And on and on and on. And when we see, and then as Rosa mentioned, when you look at police brutality, mass incarceration, this is actually far worse than at any other time in this country's history. And there are more black people, just African Americans, not counting even the Latin American population yet, but there are more African Americans locked up or held within the prison industrial complex on some level than there were held on the plantations at the height of slavery in this country. And by the way, the gap between rich and poor is wider today than under plantation enslavement. So they've actually increased the control of the percentage of wealth. And then even people like Charles Ogletree, friend of the president of Harvard University, I mean, even he has announced what others have already shown, that black America has the same 0.1% of the nation's wealth that we held in 1860. So there's just, in terms of wealth and real power, there's been no increase, there's been no shift. So when people like Cherie Chaney, talks about, she has a nice section in her book about Brothers Gonna Work It Out, where she talks a little bit about this issue of a nation within a nation, or she says a nation without a nation. Like, we have no state borders, we have no political control, but we are subsumed as if we are a nation. And again, as Saitu corrected me, it's a state that is oppressing the nations. The black and indigenous and Latin American nations are being suppressed and obliterated under the state apparatus of the United States. If we look at this relationship, then of course what those people produce as a cultural expression, in this case hip hop, is going to fit in and be forced into that basic relationship. Just like any other resource, that which the colonized produce is used to enrich the colonizer and to actually deplete and underdevelop the people who are actually producing it, which is why not only is it, I think, $2 billion in sales just directly related to the music, but hip-hop, in terms of what it does culturally and selling other items, Norman Kelly said it produces $40 billion a year for people around the world. And of course, it has not eradicated any project or any ghetto. The only way that those get eradicated is when they get torn down and gentrified and the populations are simply moved. But it's not creating a basis of wealth from which black and brown people can develop a power base and so on and so forth. So it's just like any other resource. The richest continent in the world of Africa is as poor in terms of its population, despite the fact that it produces the raw materials and natural resources for the world's wealthy. And when Forbes in 2005 put out their map of where the world's billionaires were, there was not one black African billionaire on the continent of Africa. Africa as a continent had no billionaires actually on the continent. I think there was one Egyptian on that list, and then the assumption is that either the people or the money are in Europe. So the continent itself, despite what it's producing for the world, again, just like hip hop, despite what it's producing for the world, has no real power. What it does have, much like hip hop, and even our current presidency, is a neo-colonial leadership. That is a colonized leadership brought out of the colonized population, meant to look and sound like the colonized, but actually is working for other powers. They can't, that old aphorism, a white man, in the South they used to say, a white man can't sell you no pig's feet. The idea that, if a white man shows up to sell you this harmful food, you'll know immediately that there's a problem. So they have it come in someone who looks like you, and then they sell you that nice, harmful food. And of course, you don't question it. We don't question it because they look and sound like us, so therefore it must be good. And that's what I would argue, and I did argue along with Rosa and Cynthia and many others, not enough, and certainly we didn't get enough attention, but we were arguing this is exactly what Obama was. So this question that came up, did hip-hop get Obama elected? Clearly not. I mean, and it was so obvious. First of all, Obama got more money from Wall Street than any president in history. And hip hop, as Rosa said quite accurately, was used as a marketing ploy to attach people more concretely to this neo-colonial president. Because again, as Fanon said, in a colonized situation, the cultural expression of the colonized is not allowed to be, is not fully destroyed. In fact, he says it's held permanently, as he said, in prolonged agony, to prolong the agony of the people who are producing it, to testify against them, he said. In other words, we get a version of it that speaks against our actual conditions. That's why we only see certain forms of rap music popularly promoted, only certain levels of question properly promoted, while the other questions are suppressed. So when hip-hop was coming out, as some mainstream artists were in support of President Obama, just as an example, they got plenty of attention. They got videos made and interviews, and he even mentioned a few rappers and so on and so forth. But when people like Rebel Diaz or Dead Prez or people back where I'm more familiar with, like Head Rock or Asheru or other people, just raise certain questions about either overtly or, more directly, aggressively, or more just raising questions about, are we sure about this dude? Do we, those people were ignored. And it's the same kind of thing. And it kind of goes to the one thing I heard that Bakari say earlier that I don't agree with when he was talking about Bill Cosby. This is not an issue of a and this is the point Rosa just made. This is not an issue of a generational gap when he was talking about Bill Cosby and his reactionary statements against the black poor as the cause for black people being poor. This is not a generational gap. There are plenty of people of Bill Cosby's generation who are clear on what's happening here. They're just not given the attention Bill Cosby is given. And by the way, he mentioned it, George Jackson dealt with Bill Cosby in Soledad Brother in the early 70s. I mean, he exposed Cosby as a neo-colonial plant representing in the show I Spy the positive version of the FBI while the FBI was killing the black liberation movement. And Bill Cosby at the time is saying, look, I'm just a comedian. I'm just an actor. I don't want to get into the movement. Then 40 years later, after everybody's assassinated or imprisoned, he'll come back and say, oh, you're poor because you call yourselves funny names and you have your funny haircuts and your pants sag and you don't care about yourself and that's why you're poor, which is exactly not why poverty exists. Poverty is pre-programmed, predetermined, and absolutely necessary in a capitalist economy. And then just very lastly on that, Kwame Nkrumah was very clear. Capitalism at home is domestic colonization. So we still have a capitalist so this is where, again, I have to agree entirely with Rosa here. There needs to be a distinction politically. So I'm approaching this using, and I put it on the table, my theoretical approach is internal colonialism. Other people, because it's the norm or the standard, it's just like on a university campus. They don't have to say white psychology or white philosophy or white history. They just say philosophy and psychology, and they write it big on the buildings, journalism, and they don't have to say white journalism. But if you want to have you have to be the hyphenated, that's the black psychology, which means abnormal and less than or crazy, or we kind of let it in because you niggas got crazy in the 60s and 70s and had movements and stormed the campuses and we got scared. So here's an Africana program that we're now destroying at Cornell, by the way, and all across the country. So so what they don't say is that I am coming from the average, just like there are pop rappers and pop entertainers, there are pop academics, there are pop politicians and whoever, and they don't have to say, my theoretical approach is pluralism and liberalism and support the Democratic Party without question. They don't have to say that because you just put that on the table, you just present that, and that's normal, and that's obviously the standard, and that's acceptable without question. The rest of us have to be the hyphenated Oh, that's that crazy. But I agree, though, that we have to be more clear. So I agree. I am a hip-hop radical. I don't believe we can approach it without looking, if we're going to be a hip-hop nation, that we have to, without looking at where's the nationalism, where's our control over our cultural expression, where's our control over our art, where's the control over our communities in the nationalist sense. Similarly, if we're a hip-hop nation, if we're a black nation, if we're a brown nation, what does that mean in terms of our relationship to the dominant nation? And if we're not looking at it, as I would argue, in terms of colonialism and colonization, we're missing what is going on here. And we're missing what opportunities we have, what struggles we need to engage in, and what opportunities or what methods we have to take that break with that norm. We cannot just keep voting for Democratic Party politics, or we cannot just keep welcoming without question pop this or pop that, whether, again, it's academics or politicians or et cetera. Just very lastly, this issue of media is very important. Media are not the technologies. Media are not computers and internet and books. That's the organized technologies that disseminate media. Media are best understood as ideology, worldview. It's a content message being delivered, and those who control it assure that their version of the world is imposed on us through control over our cultural expression, the forms that they choose to promote, the other forms they choose to omit, and in that way they have us working as neo-colonial operatives, carrying their message in our language with our phenotype or our skin color or our hair or our texture, whatever, and then we carry that very white, conservative, capitalist, supremacist ideology into our communities, this individualism, this conspicuous consumption, this anti-womanness, this anti-blackness into our own communities, but because it's coming out of a black or brown face, we just, we dismiss and say, don't hate, appreciate, don't be a hater. Which of course is no different than when Noam Chomsky said, people dismiss me as a conspiracy theorist so they can avoid institutional analysis. And that's the same thing here. He's a hater. Don't talk to him about what he's actually saying, because I don't want to get into that. He's just a hater, so we could just dismiss it. So that's why I was joking with Rosa earlier. I admit it. I'm a hater. I hate everything that's preventing us from having a revolution. Now that we got that on the table, you're clear, I'm clear. Now let's move on. We've established I'm a hater, so why am I actually hating? Let's have that discussion, and then I think we can actually get somewhere. And I'll stop there, and then we can have that discussion. Now, I'm a hater. I'm an internal colonial theorist. I'm a hip-hop radical. Let's talk. Let's build. Thank you very much. Sure.
Thank you very much. I thought about this, hip-hop nationalism in a way, because the brilliant scholar, Afro-British scholar Paul Gilroy, he wrote already in the 90s about, he couldn't understand. He was criticizing the hip-hop intellectuals because they were so nationalistic in their approach. And I thought about that a little bit when you were talking, because I support, and I think he supports too, what Craig Watkins called the cultural war, that you have to, question who's going to be, hired at the university, who is going to get access to higher education and all that, But I don't think it had to be an African-American scholar who teach hip-hop, because I want African-American scholar to teach Beethoven. I don't think you have to be man and German to teach Beethoven. So I can see now how the hip hop, the hip hop community, they can be, creating more segregation in the society if they are so nationalistic in the approach to everything, And so I thought about how you respond to that in a way.
Well, to flesh it out more, the way I align myself or the groups now is based on politics, right? So as I don't see Clarence Thomas or Condoleezza Rice, or, I wouldn't want John McWhorter, teaching a hip hop class at Columbia, where I would definitely appreciate a Adam Mansbeck or Jennifer Calderon, who does, I think, much better work around white privilege than Tim Wise, because I actually see him as a hustler at this point. So the fact that you asked me that, thank you, because that's how I roll. And especially in electoral politics, being part of a Green Party that's predominantly white, it's still, I'm not basing how I'm aligning based on color. So when I was talking more, you know, it's my initial thing that unfortunately I am seeing way too many of the wrong white people teaching hip hop. And the white women are dominating, like in a lot of spheres right now, without any understanding of black politics, of like, without even sometimes liking black people. You know, like Chuck D's, like, you love hip hop, but do you love black people? And I've actually been in some academic settings where I'm like, she's teaching the fundamental hip hop class and she literally hates black people. Like, what is happening? So I would say that I'm not nationalistic in that point where I think, as Jared was explaining, that everything black in a black face or brown face is good. And that comes from a lot of maturity in politics. That also comes from a moment or 2 or 3 years where I just, in college, I wanted nothing to do with white people. I was like, you know what? Like, they're the enemy. I don't care if that's my half cousin. Like, I'm not trying to build with you. I think that's important to say a little bit because that's how we get to this, I think, higher level of consciousness of where you then begin to say, dude, that Barack Obama, he may be looking like you could chill with him on the South Side, but let's look at his politics. So I'm going to therefore run with the Green Party. And a lot of people are going to question, well, you're working with all those white people. Yes, I'm working with revolutionary-minded white people, and I'm going to work with them before I work with some black. Yeah, yeah, or like the Democratic Party's not white. So I understand where you got that from, but I just wanted to expand more and say I'm not stuck in that place right now, you know, and that I really think when it comes to whiteness, I appreciate those who not only fight against white supremacy, but internally are fighting against their own white privilege and sometimes commit that white suicide for the better. And those people are, you know, are around. And
it's not only about,
yeah.
I think, white
So that was
pride.
just the personal.
It's more about the argument, you know, the nationalistic argument. Because I've heard, you know, a lot of hip hop pioneers at conferences like that, you know, say you are doing the wrong hip hop, you are doing the wrong hip hop. If you come to culture, you have to accept, you know, the rules and the, you know, the aesthetic of hip hop. And then they sound exactly like the populist people in Europe at the moment. If the immigrants come here, they have to accept our culture. Yeah. And that's because I think culture is standing, you know, is constantly, you know, moving to something new.
Yeah, but the problem that I had with Gilroy is that, is if I remember correctly, it's been a while, is that, and even in hearing the way you're describing it, is that the onus on the hostility is not among the colonized who assume a certain level of nationalism out of self-defense and political, cultural, social survival. So the you know, we can't take it out of a context of organized European white hostility to African Latino communities and then put it on them and say, oh, you're being segregationist because you are adopting a black nationalism, when it's really an issue of white nationalism that is fostering all of this on the world. Then the other question, similar to even what your point about Beethoven is that sure, I don't, you know, we should all be discussing Beethoven and everybody should be involved in hip hop, but I don't think we have to deracialize or decontextualize the history that produced Beethoven or produced hip hop. And I certainly don't think that if white people are going to engage in the teaching or the practice of various elements of hip hop, that they should be devoid of understanding its origins, or that they shouldn't appreciate what the conditions of those communities who produced it in the first place are experiencing. So that's all I'm saying. I also, by the way, would think that there would be a big cry out of Europe if all of a sudden something were to happen and control over Beethoven's image and cultural production was somehow in the hands of Africans and Latin Americans. I mean, yeah, no, I think Europe would start to fall apart and start raising serious questions like, you all can listen to him and everything, but don't think that you can actually make all the money from his product, or certainly don't think that it's, you know, you can interpret him on the basis of an African cultural expression or having an Afrocentric or a non-Western centric cultural value be what you use to interpret him, right? You see what I'm saying? So,
isn't that part of what's happening? Like part of the Tea Party's response is, even though Barack is not this radical figure that some of us imagined he would be, because it was all
it was an illusion, absolutely. Yeah.
He always represented himself as who he was from the beginning.
He did.
There was nothing there that said that he was going to be a radical politician.
Right.
The change was a great slogan.
Yeah.
But, you know, But the Tea Party, isn't what they're responding to is almost like that America, this thing that they believe it to be, is in the hands of this black man.
But see, again, I'm gonna throw this out there. I haven't fully developed this thought because it's like many of the things I argue is not welcomed in many spaces. But the reality is, with the Tea Party, we got to remember this is not some grassroots movement. This is the Koch family, a well-funded, one of the richest people in the world, funding poor, or not even really poor, but middle-class white folks into organized activity to raise a fuss. And then the real problem is that Obama, because, as you said, is not really a progressive or radical, he's using the Tea Party to be less progressive than he would have been, it's almost like he's welcoming this backlash, so-called, so that he doesn't have to feel pressure from the left, and it's working. In fact, in many of the spaces that I inhabit, when you start raising questions, people the first thing they say is, "Oh man, but what about the backlash? We got to defend our brother against these angry white folks." And I'm like, "But he's not fighting them either. He's not fighting them either. He's welcoming them." And then he tells the left, "Leave me alone. I got to deal with this." And then we say, "Cool, he's got to deal with that." And meanwhile, he's never fighting them, and he's never doing anything for us anyway.
It's like
What happens is, a lot of people thought they was passive aggressive. What he's doing, he's got to deal with these factions in America. Let's face it, this is a bipolar country because of the ability to have free thinking. And each one of these politicians will just merge together for a common end, even though it may not be the end that they had wanted. Now what Obama has to do is, he has got to negotiate this gauntlet of different theories and the connection of different theories with different goals coming together to make their goal closer to where they can be fearless of victory. He has to deal with this whole issue. I remember when Obama was being voted in, and everybody knew he was going to be the president. A couple of black people thought that the world was going to change. It's not that simple. One person cannot change this country. That's why we have a Senate and Congress. We have all these other different fractions that stop and hope. The only reason Bush did it is because he just rough-shot it over everybody.
And that's what Obama should do for poor people.
But they say, what happens is black people can't do that. Black people don't do that because we feel we can't do it. It will cause more harm to the country if we would. Now, as far as when you were saying your first introduction, I got what you said. You actually studied the Young Lords in Chicago?
No, I studied the entire organization.
So what you did was you studied the grassroots gang activity, and organized it into a community entity that was progressive. Right. That was fantastic. So your goal there, that summation of what you came up with is we should have a hip hop party. Is that what you?
No. I don't think.
Because what happens is, even libertarians, let's say the Tea Party, right? The Tea Party at this moment is a contender for a third spot. And before it was libertarians.
No, there's mad third parties.
Yeah.
No. I'm part of the Green Party. Right. Okay, so there's the Libertarian parties on the ballot, the Green Party, right, the Socialist Party. Right. Now in New York, we have the Freedom Party. There's multitudes of third parties. Yeah. The Tea Party, to me, to go back to Warren's a little bit, Bakari earlier was talking about how the Tea Party is also kind of manufactured by the media. I think it's both. It's the media, it's the money. But I think the Tea Party has never not existed. That white supremacist thinking, right? I think it's coming out now, and their whipping boy literally is a Barack Obama. They have some figure. But really, I think the underlying part is brown people and the immigrant problem in this country for white people. Because they're starting to realize in Texas, they're no longer the majority, for real. Right? So I think, I often tell you, I'm telling people at tables, F the Tea Party. They're going to do what they're going to do because they're white supremacists. We've seen this. Study the KKK, study Lit. We've seen this. It's now just in a nicer face, and it has a lot of more money behind it. We need to be focusing on the Democratic Party and how their policies are just as white supremacist driven as any other Republican Party, which goes to what you're saying. these Obama's trying to always have consensus. Well, Bush wasn't. So what like people be giving him too much slack, not you, like, well, he's nice and he's a little passive aggressive. So I'm like, dude, he knew what he was doing. He's not stupid. You know what you're doing when you're running for president, which is why I believe the most important thing to talk about in electoral politics is no longer who's the president, but who's in the House of Representatives and the Senate. So it wouldn't have mattered if me and Cynthia won if we didn't have no Green Party senators or third party. So I see the whole system at this point as untenable for our people. Like, I'm on the point where I'm like, what's the point of voting? For what? So you could feel good every 2 or 4 years, you pushed a button and then you left and you did nothing after you pushed a button? And I see that more and more now because they're getting our people so focused on this 2012 election to make sure Obama gets in, to fight the Tea Party, and right in Egypt and everywhere else, cats aren't asking for revolution by asking to vote. They're like, you know what? Y'all are out.
But see, this goes back
and just to say, I'm not saying it's the same thing. It's two totally different ways of how movement and revolution happens. I think that we've gotten to the point when then talking about hip-hop politics that we only focus on voting in these big elections and we're not focusing on organizing, movement building. Why don't you worry about your local city council person that their policies actually affect your neighborhood? And, even think about the fact that every vote doesn't count. It's the Electoral College that picks the president. We should be talking about proportional representation, instant runoff voting. We should really be talking about dismantling the entire electoral political system as it is now, especially with the Supreme Court decision, Citizens United, that, as Bakari was saying, what it essentially means now is that by 2016, the president is going to be sponsored by Coca-Cola or Pepsi or whatever pharmaceutical company, and literally that's what you're going to see. Your president, is the Coca-Cola president or something like that.
No, but this is my point just very quickly about what approach we're using to analyze the situation. If we're really a hip-hop nation, the hip-hop national response, if it was operating on a nationalist perspective, would have been similar to the Tea Parties, but with a different set of politics. We have no agenda. We have no core, just like we can identify core elements of hip hop. We can't seem to identify, or what I would argue, we have misidentified what should be our core elements politically. Rosa outlined a number of them: poverty, political imprisonment, mass incarceration, and then put that on the table and then organize around it and say, where's the redress for these situations? But we don't do that because because our hip hop nationalism has been erased. If it was ever allowed to develop in the first place. It has become a very liberal, democratic thing. And when we interviewed our brother Lumumba Bandeli, he made that same point that Rosa just made about voting, that we have been reduced to thinking that this is the sum total of our political activity. And why I really love this internal colonial theoretical approach is because voting isn't even on the list in terms of how you deal with it. It's not even on the list. And the founders of this country did set it up quite carefully. If we read the Federalist Papers in particular, you see they set up intentionally.
They were all rich.
Well, they were all rich, slave-owning landholders who didn't even want, they were only even concerned about white poor people, because black people, indigenous people, and women were off the table already.
All women.
All women, that's what I'm saying. So they were only worried about white men with some degree of land, and even within that group, they were like, we got to set this up so the poor ones can't get the stuff from the rest of us. And they set up the three branches intentionally to make voting, if not useless, an extremely limited activity. So it's been set up from the jump, but because we have been conditioned that this is the full extent of our legitimate response to this horrific condition that we find ourselves in, we don't even raise the fund. We can't, that's what I'm saying. When Rosa was doing the campaign, you can't even get within hip hop a discussion of their candidacy. I mean, that's what to this day, I was completely naive about that. I completely underestimated that. I'll be honest. I had no way of knowing that we would not be able to have that discussion within hip hop, but which has further convinced me of this issue of nationalism and colonialism.
I'm sorry, because
there's other people.
No.
I'm curious. A recent book I actually just read was We Want Freedom by Mumia Abu-Jamal. My girlfriend far more of a revolutionary than I am. But I'm kind of like trying to get into it. She read so much stuff.
But she's the woman in your life? Is that what you're saying?
Well,
So you already on the right track then. Follow her lead.
What I take from that book and just like I think hip hop is an actual movement that has been started, but I just think that there's so many artists that are probably fearful of undertaking that job and that opportunity, because hip hop is so ripe for one person, one individual can do it, just to start this movement. And I just think they're all afraid. They're just worried about money and being on the side. And just, I mean, how do you feel about that? Do you think like one artist? I think one artist can do it, but I mean, who's going to step out to do something like that?
Well, I don't see it that way. I see it as, I think history is pretty clear. Movements start collectively from the bottom up, and then the artists, just like the politicians, are put in place to do for that movement what they're there to do. I mean, I remember hearing Amiri Baraka and Askia Touré talking about their poetry, and they said that they remember being at some rally somewhere and looking at each other and realizing we are revolutionaries who do poetry. They never saw themselves as, I'm just an artist, or, I'm just going to attach myself onto this movement. In other words, the movement made the art possible. Same thing, Emory Douglas of the Panther Party said the same thing. Without the Panther Party, my art would not have had either inspiration or a home. So I think that we have to build the movement first, and the artists will come. But again, somewhat, I have to disagree with the brother in the back too. We are not a free-thinking society, and one of the reasons we don't see these artists come up, in part, is because what we have a hard time catching up to in this country in particular is that we are the most propagandized and limited in our thought, maybe in the world. The media system in this country and around the world, but extending from this country, is the most tightly controlled, pervasive, and consolidated in its ownership than any time in world history. So many of us, we are conditioned to think we're free thinkers. But that's why Kwame Ture was so right. He said capitalism makes us think we're thinking when we are merely reacting to stimuli. So that's why I think the one artist thing is not going to happen. We're going to have to really work hard and build this movement from the bottom up.
That's again just focusing on the one element of hip hop. That's the rap, the recorded artist who performs, and I really don't care about them. It's all men. I told Jared the other day, I'm so woman, not like, I'm a feminist, of course, but I'm at the point where I'm like, I'm tired of these dudes. Like, really? Like, no, I'm saying in this sense. I'm not saying there's not female artists. There's hundreds of thousands of dope female artists that will never get any type of play, like, especially if you're not a Nicki Minaj type of artist. But my whole thing is that often in hip-hop, the political discussion in hip-hop, we always go back to the rapper. And I think a good thing is M1 always says, I'm not a rapper. I'm a political activist who uses my tool of rapping to get my message out. There's an over-reliance in youth culture to always look at a rapper, particularly a male rapper, to be like all of a sudden Common says something, everybody believes that. And that to me is problematic. I don't even listen to rap music. But I'm a hip hop cat. I don't, it's an important part of the culture, but it's 1/5 of the culture for me.
No, but I'm a huge sports fan. As much as I love hip hop, I love sports. And I think one of the greatest athletes of all time that actually took that step was Muhammad Ali. I mean, he used boxing. I mean, he really gave up what could have been even greater than what he was. When he took the platform and he stood out, spoke about, the war in Vietnam and everything about that.
But he didn't do that as an individual. Yeah. He did that as a member of the Nation of Islam.
And because he had the conversation with Malcolm X.
He did that within the context of an international uprising, just like John Carlos and Tommy Smith, their heroic move with the fists at the Olympics. I mean, all of this was inspired by a movement.
Same with Roberto Clemente, who the day that Dr. King got assassinated, the next day every player played in baseball, and Roberto Clemente said no. But it's still an over-reliance on this one person. And especially, again, within hip-hop, it's always been, obviously, rap is the fundamental element. I'm not taking that away. But the over-reliance on always looking at rappers, it's like, whatever, dude. Like, you're rapping, great. If you make music for the revolution, like a Dead Prez, Immortal Technique, a Mystic, an Invincible, but when you talk to all those artists, they'll tell you first they were activists. Immortal was locked up and became a prison activist, and then same with even Saigon, whose I think new album is incredible, but that's another thing. That other brother.
But definitely, like, a lot of these people all exist, and what I was going to say is that from what we were talking about earlier, is that hip hop is under attack, and the individuality that it originated with, people making their own mixtapes and peddling them around the neighborhood. You can't really just do that, even though you have these tools. Artists have these tools, and you can use the internet. They're shutting sites down where you have thousands of independent artists. So these people exist, and it's not just rappers. You have people. I got a picture of a mural this guy did all along 9th Avenue with like Mayor Bloomberg with a Grinch suit on. You know, so it is in all the four elements, and I think it's just suppressed so much. And you have to look. You can't really expect something to be emailed to you or to just, you know, it's gonna fall in your lap. You gotta go look, you know, for like-minded people, and
but I don't.
we all exist.
But this is you're right on so many levels. But I want to just say again, I don't want to describe it as hip hop as being under attack. You know, we would have never. But my point is this: because we would have never said, you know, jazz is under attack, blues is under attack.
But it was because
no.
People, classical artists said,
No. My point is that black people are under attack.
Oh, absolutely.
Latinos are under attack. Working people are under attack. The indigenous population is under attack. And when we deracialize it, we in a way we do what Ward Connolly has been asking us to do. His whole thing is, I'm a black man, but I have Irish blood in me, and I have all this other stuff in me. I don't want to be racialized.
People in trailer parks are poorer than I am.
No,
that's what I'm saying. They're not, most of them are white.
That's why I said working. That's why I added working people.
African.
That's why I said working. My point is this: working people are under attack. That's my point. But we wouldn't say about white people in trailers, country music is under attack.
No.
We would, you know, we would be doing them a disservice to say that. We have to. The point is, we have to remember this is a capitalist, white supremacist, colonizing society, and my point is that I don't want people to lose sight of that when we say hip hop is under attack, as if the people themselves are not there, and then I think, you know, and then we lose sight of what, you know, again, that Ward Connolly thing is, let's get rid of racial categorization. But in a racist society, all that's going to do is allow for racism to work even more successfully, because we won't have any markers or any way to indicate. If we take, you know, race off the paper, we won't have any way to prove, to the extent that we haven't already, which is it's not nothing to prove, but we won't be able to prove what is actually happening. So that's what I'm trying to say. It's not hip hop is under attack. Black people, working people, brown people, the indigenous, women.
I wouldn't even say brown, because it's really just working people. If you go anywhere in the world where there's brown people,
you'd have to ask. But then you got to see. That's the thing, though. You can't argue. I can't do that either. I can't go that far either.
Black music is obviously connected to brown people.
I have three more.
Sorry.
We got three more questions, and I'm going to take the last one.
Let the brother behind the other brother, the guy behind you. Yeah, you.
Okay, I start now.
Oh, he didn't speak yet. The guy behind us. He has
Thank you,
something to
Rosa.
ask a question.
You go first.
I'm just trying to be fair. I've seen him holding his hand.
First, I want to thank y'all for really bringing a radical perspective to just this dialogue. I really appreciate that. I think it's much needed, and it's dope that you know, this space here is giving y'all the space to do that. So I just want to acknowledge that, because that's I know it can be tough to find spaces where some of those views are welcomed, embraced, acknowledged, appreciated, all of the above. But what I think something that's been missing from this conversation we've been having here today, and I don't know if it was, I've kind of seen it alluded to a bit, heard it alluded to a bit, but, and I'm thinking about electoral politics starts when you're 18, right, in this country. You can vote when you're 18 or whatever. But being political begins when you're political. You can be 13 and be political. So what I'm thinking more about is how can we continue to, because I don't feel like the work has stopped. The radical work hasn't stopped. It's been suppressed to a great degree, but it hasn't stopped. So how can we continue to connect like that radical political education to those folks who they cannot vote, but they're sucked in by the capitalist system still. The 14-year-olds who have to do what they have to do to buy those expensive sneakers, or those 15-year-olds who suck in the images and do what they do, right? So how does that political education get to those folks? And within the context of that hip hop, the hip hop that you're talking about, sister, about the 5 elements, how do we do that where it isn't just, you know, me as an independent creative artist being hired by a nonprofit to come in and teach them how to rap?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Just because I have that gift and that tool, but that's not all. So how do we move away from just waiting till they're 18 to acknowledge that, okay, now you can be political, when you can be political when you're 13, 12, whatever? How do we, you get my question?
No, I totally get it. I mean, I think one of the things is that the acknowledgement that everything in America is political. Like, the person you choose to lay down with and have children with is a political choice. Where you choose to live are political choice. Like, you know, so, but there's two things that happen. And I think one of the most important things you can do for children, whether they're from your body or not, is this idea of racially socializing them, right? So you got to raise up your child like Jewish folks do. That Holocaust happened, and we're going to remember it every year. Or my migrant experience in Mexico happened, and it was horrific, and I'm going to tell you about it. Or my Puerto Rican colonial experience as your parent happened, and I'm going to explain it. So first, I think the minute your children begin to talk, they're already being socialized in the school. So we as parents have to politically socialize them. And especially as poor folks who depend on a public education system that is never going to teach our children politics. Now, for those who are in a public education system, you know by now, or you've just got out of it, that there's no civic engagement courses being taught. So you're not taught what is it to be a citizen. Because if you were taught that, you would be taught that before you vote, you need voter education. You have to know the issues, your community, who you're voting for. So I think along with racially socializing young people, we now have to politically socialize them. You know, and I'm not, let me not say that indoctrine, I'm more saying give them the information for them to figure out that politic on their own, right? And I think it can't start at 18 anymore, right? I feel like if they're gonna lock up our 10-year-old little boys and girls, then we need to be teaching them at 4 why they're a target, how to avoid it, how to understand the system, at some point manipulate it to be safe if you need to be in a certain situation. I think by the time we're 18 in this society, I actually think by the time young people are hitting 14, if they don't have a little bit of that already, they're going to have a very hard life in finding their identity and how they work in a community or manifest that, you know? And as a woman, I think it becomes more incumbent not to only racially socialize or politically socialize, but as young girls, we have to genderize like they have to know that the minute they're about 4 or 5, they are under attack. Particularly black and brown women's bodies are consistently under attack. And what that could psychologically do to you by the time you are that 13 or 14-year-old girl about to hit puberty, when for the last decade it's been a constant fetishizing of black and brown bodies, no matter how young they are as women. You know, and that's because I have a daughter now, and I see it at 5. Like, I gotta make specific choices about even the jeans I buy her. You see, and these are individual things, but I think if we did them better collectively as a community, we'd have kids in no matter what condition that at least be ready to fight back, as opposed to always turning on each other. So I hope that, you know.
Yes. I want to raise a warning flag. Can you say that? Warning flag? Yes.
Yeah.
For the Green Party, because you know I was a member in the 80s, and in Germany and Sweden, everyone thought, "Oh, this is good. This is so radical."
Yeah.
Change. But now they are, you know, part of the establishment, and they are, you know, in governments, and they are ruling, and so, but their existence, just not only the existence of the Green Party, made, you know, the politics, the European politics of taking care of the environment so much better. So I can see I think that the most important question at the moment, I think, is to protect things at the internet, because I think the revolution will start on the internet. You know, because all politicians, they are afraid of the truth, and you know, the WikiLeaks, it's threatening all
I kind of
kinds
see
of
it the
politicians
opposite
all
way, though.
Yeah.
I don't think the internet ever starts a revolution. It's a tool for the revolution.
Yeah, it's a tool, of course.
Well, because that discussion is happening a lot in America, and I think it's dangerous, and it's happened a lot within hip-hop politics, right? Facebook and Twitter. Well, that starts the protest. No, the people are already ready. They, like in Egypt, you can trace, not in Egypt, in Libya. Yeah, I think it was in Libya. The way people started talking about it is they went to a dating website, right? So they were like, the Jasmine Revolution is coming. Oh, meet me tomorrow at the cafe. You're not meeting for a date, you were meeting for a protest. That's where the internet then becomes exciting. But in America, particularly young people and movement organizers have become so over-reliant on technology, not knowing, hello, at any minute they push a button, that whole shit is shut down. How are you orally communicating your politics? How are you going to get to the corner before the police surround it and shut it down? What do you know about urban planning? Do you know that every city was built in a certain way so that police could shut it down? And these are the things that unfortunately younger people are not learning because they think, I put it on Facebook, everybody's coming to my event, you know? And as the Green Party goes, look, I think the European Green Party and the Green Party in Africa, the growing Green Party in Latin America are all different. But I do see the Green Party in Europe still as having some politicians that are a lot more revolutionary than I've seen Green Party members in the United States. But the Green Party in the United States, as an infrastructure, we don't have it together. And if we're not going to take corporate money, we have to figure out a way of how we're going to raise that money if we're interested in playing this game. And lastly, the Green Party is still a predominantly white party. Now, more younger Black and Latino and indigenous people and Asian folks are coming into the party, but the Green Party is suffering from their white liberal politics. So even, look, when me and Cynthia got the nomination, there was half of a party out there that was trying to get Nader in. Even though Nader was like, dudes, I'm not even in your party anymore. Like, why are you voting for me? But the backlash against me and Cynthia, these two women of color, and then I'm bringing up the Panther Party. So you got Green Party members that lost their mind and started saying the most racist things to me and Cynthia. Then I'm running a hip-hop political agenda. So every question was like, when are you going to rap? It's like, I'm not a rapper. Like, what the fuck? Like, don't you know what hip-hop is? So, like, that's the problem that I tell people. When we get into third parties, we're still dealing with third parties that have over-relied and keep bringing up the white third party. The Ralph Naders to the Ron Paul, which I don't know why anybody would uplift Ron Paul or his son. And I think that's a very good point to make, because I believe if the Green Party was fully organized and really allowed particularly young people, but young people of color, to fill in its ranks, we'd have our equivalent and not a violent equivalent of a Tea Party movement that at least would organize, like get people together on a mass scale to have discussions about certain things.
But don't you think we have to defend the freedom on the internet, like the WikiLeaks?
Oh no, I'm not. Of course, I mean I defend it. I'm just saying that in America, for young people, when they see Egypt and the constant propaganda is, well, it happened because of Twitter. No, it happened because women were organized, and it happened because young people, there's 60% unemployment and they're tired, and it also happened because the unions, right, they might not be the union we see, but the collective of bus drivers and police were like, this is where the people are. We're shutting it down. We're not driving a bus today. We're getting in the streets with the people. This is going to be very interesting in America. And this Sunday, on Sunday at midnight, the Capitol in Wisconsin is to be cleared. At this very moment, the police have joined in with the people. But I'm curious to know, is Sunday at midnight, when them orders come down, are those police members going to be on the side of the people, or are they going to be on the side of the governor? My inclination is it's America. You're going to listen to what your boy, the boss says, as opposed to what happened in Egypt when that command came down and all the police and everybody were like, no, we're with the people.
Let me just very quickly to the brother. I just wanted to add one thing. We have to have organization.
Yeah.
It can't just be individual parenting. Again, as a parent myself, becoming a father was the first time I saw, beyond intellectually understanding it, how powerless I really am. And all the stuff I've been studying about media that I could intellectually understand, you just see how powerless. I mean, we have to have a collective, mass-based, organized effort to help all of us deal with those issues. Just a couple of things very quickly. What I liked most about Rosa and Cynthia's run in the Green Party was that it was kind of almost, what I thought it was going to be was like a shocking reminder that this is what hip-hop was really supposed to be. An anti-authoritarian, an anti-norm tendency. And instead of just saying, hey, we're hip-hop, we're this, that, and that, I'm hip-hop and this, that, and I'm just going to go vote for the Democrat because everybody said to, here were these two women black and brown women saying, who's more hip hop than Rosa Clemente? I mean, you can't argue with that. So here they are saying, we don't have to go with the norm. We are actually living up to the true legacy of not only hip hop, but black and brown radicalism, which is in part what developed hip hop as a cultural expression in the first place. The last thing, again, very quickly about the internet, again, my conclusions on this are very unpopular, but I haven't seen enough evidence to tell me that I'm wrong and I shouldn't have them, which is that the internet, I made this thing about, Sir Isaac Newton is given credit for identifying the laws of gravity and physics or something, I can't remember all three of them now, but I made this joke about, but not really a joke, about Huey Newton, that what we need is our Newton's laws, because Huey Newton was very clear that technology is developed by exploiting and expropriating from the people, and then it is used to re-exploit the people. So advances in technology have not revolutionized social relationships. They've intensified and worsened them. So the idea that the internet is going to be some radical break is missing the point. So I start from that fundamental ideological position. But then if you start to look at the research, and I just want to throw out a couple of names, within media studies, there's the work of Dan Schiller, who's been doing the leading work on this for more than a decade now, who's more or less ignored. But his what we're dealing with the internet, for instance, is the gadget, the technology that drives this internet gadget is being used to surveil us on using satellites, to remote control weapons technology, to give the United States the full spectrum dominance, is to use their language, that they want to have over the entire planet and into the stratosphere. So while we're getting excited about Facebook and Twitter, they're lining everything up so they can not only monitor us and watch us, and as Rosa said, shut it down whenever they want, but they can push buttons, and as they already have now, they have kids playing video games in Las Vegas, dropping bombs on people in Pakistan and Yemen. So we're missing the point of what the internet is really here to do. It is military technology developed with the federal government's budget and sanction to surveil and make their business, as usual, easier. The fact that we can have some convenience with email or Facebook or Twitter is an ancillary side issue, maybe more better understood in terms of its ability to distract us with yet another toy. But the most powerful movements the world has ever seen happened long before this technology. I mean, Farrakhan got 2 million black people in D.C. before the internet. The Black Power movement, there was no internet. The indigenous struggles that rose up in this country and created some of the most intense backlash, granted they may not have won in the way that we would want to call it a success, occurred without the internet. So the idea, again, that we're going to post something and, in fact, I think it's actually weakening our movement. This focus, this overemphasis on the internet is weakening our movement. It is limiting our communication. And then if we look at the work of Matthew Heinemann, he shows quite quantitatively there is more concentration in terms of news and entertainment online in terms of ownership of media than there is offline. And one just quick stat that he threw out there is that in the traditional print world, the major newspaper organizations control about 20% of the market. Online, those same corporate entities control 30% of the web traffic. The top 5 websites are routinely Google, Facebook, Windows Mail, and then some other, corporate, whatever entity. The idea, so when he was monitoring 800,000 websites just for news and entertainment websites, 300 dominated the 800,000 and 5 got 20% of all the five websites, 20% of all the news and entertainment web traffic in the country. So the rest of us, I have a blog, you have a blog, I'm sorry? Out of 800,000. And what's worse than that is that he's only dealing with news and entertainment websites. When you match all of those 800,000 websites to the web traffic that just porn gets, they're not even in the ballpark.
Yeah, exactly.
So the internet is this big porn exchange with a little bit of news, and within that little bit of news, a little bit of radicalism, a little bit of alternative cultural expression. That's right. And then what we see is, again, the biggest transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich has occurred in the lifetime of the internet.
Look at PayPal. You
can't do a
It's like the
transaction
5 record
without
labels
giving
used to
them-
control
you
all
know,
the rap
and
music.
it's
kind
like
of.
And now you have 3 record labels that control all the popular expression of rap music in this country. So we're actually, it's getting worse and worse and worse. So yeah, we should protect,
Oh, definitely.
particularly Bradley Manning. I can't imagine the solitary confinement stuff is ridiculous.
Yeah.
We should protect the right of Assange and them to put the stuff out. And we should challenge, even though I didn't vote for him, we should all challenge Obama to stand up for what he said he was going to do in protecting net neutrality. Which he's backtracking on. One of the few promises he actually made, he is going completely 180 degrees against. So I agree with all of that. I just don't want us to lose sight of the fact that we should rely on those mixtapes and local community radio and pirate radio and not Facebook, but face-to-face community grassroots organization.
Yeah.
That is the only way I think we're going to get out of this.
Damn, you are a doctor.
People post that one line on their Facebook page, and that's it. Oh, that's my revolutionary duty. for
No
today.
question.
I'll put a quote.
And by the way, one last thing.
Oh, no, wait,
Rosa
you
and I, just for me, one last
go
thing.
ahead.
Rosa and I know very well some very fraudulent political activists who will run around here and claim they have the biggest organizations in the world because they have 700,000 email people on their list. You know, they collected 700,000 emails, and they use that as a way to get nonprofit money and to put themselves out as if they actually have a constituency and a followership. When in reality, it's very easy. I could collect all your emails today and be like, look, I got 20 more followers. But we're not organized. We're not unified. We're not meeting and strategizing. It's just being pimped.
It's like internet thugs.
Can I quote you on that? Internet thugs.
I know you want to close, but I think because this just happened this week, which I see as something good, that comes out of the internet, but that is now going to require movement, right? So, the billboard that went up in Soho, the most dangerous place in the womb for the most dangerous place for an African American is in the womb, right? Wow. And quickly, if you were on Facebook and any one of your friends, you began to see all that. And like in 3 days, they took down the billboard, right?
See, the new technology is messing us up.
So in 3 days, they took down the billboard, right? Now, I think part of that was because not only particularly women, but there were a lot of men, too, began to call, the number for the dude, like, you cannot put that shit up in New York, blah, 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 blah. But the bigger thing is that these billboards are in 20 other cities in Black America, right? Yeah, and that the statement has been said. So how then are we as particular women, pro-choice women and pro-choice men, because there's anti-choice men and women, but pro-choice women and men who believe in reproductive rights, what's the larger strategy we're going to have, but particularly as women, to fight off an assault against Planned Parenthood? Even if we've never used it, it's an assault on us, on women's bodies again. So that's why I was telling a couple friends, like, this is a great discussion to have on Facebook, and yeah, you hate me because I believe in abortion, blah, blah. But the bigger thing is that it's in 20 other cities, the message is out there. And in Kathy Cohen's new book that Bakari did some of the research for, called Democracy Remix, one of the most social issues that young women and men, Black and Latino, were the most conservative around was around abortion. And that actually the idea of reproductive rights in younger communities of color is now you have young people being like, no, she shouldn't have an abortion. No, you shouldn't go to Planned Parenthood. No, it's a man's right. Like these real super retrograde, very dangerous ways of thinking. And I find it fascinating because I don't think the internet could deal with it, but the internet at a given moment is good to at least get the billboard down and start the discussion, but then it's up to us as activists, academics, intellectuals to further that discussion in our community because it's such a big attack now on women. So sorry, Warren, but thank you for that.
We have to stop putting the men weighing down on us as we speak.
At the Center for Worker Education.
Elena has spoken. She'll pay the rest of the bill. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Just to that point is, I was watching BET one day, and it was actually, they were airing some special performance with Barack Obama, I think from like 2 years ago. And he was being interviewed by Will Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith. So I'm watching it, whatever. Then there's a commercial break, and then this organization airs a commercial, this organization called Black Dignity, was essentially the same message that was on that billboard.
Yeah.
I saw this like 2 months ago, so it's
Yeah.
not, I think, like part of the issue with like the internet is that you get the message from this one, called this one organization, but if you Google something along the lines of black organizations that are pro-life or anti-abortion, you see dozens.
Yeah.
So, sometimes the media is quick and we just get that quick bit and then we only pay attention to that quick bit, but we're not paying attention to
Yeah.
these other organizations that are doing the same work. And, we'll see another billboard with another organization. No, that's not the one. So I think it's like a tricky scheme to like try to navigate everything. But there's a lot of forces working against the work that we're trying to do.
And by the way,
Hell
did the
yeah.
woman who runs Planned Parenthood, I just saw on Democracy Now!, I think she said that 80% of what they do has nothing to do with abortions anyway.
No, I mean,
it's like
yeah.
all other care for all other kinds of issues that they're
Yeah.
being attacked.
Including
in
fertility treatment for
Yeah.
men, and when you have the House of Representatives that's supposed to be a little bit more, quote, liberal than the Senate voting to take away federal funding, but they're not voting away to take federal funding away from freaking Blackwater or,
Yeah.
it is scary as a woman because as much as I've been, my short 39 years, I've never felt as under attack as recently. It started for me personally during the Green Party run, but out of the personal, it's like, what is going on? Like, what is happening in our own black and brown community where we are still having a discussion that is not, the discussion itself is not retrograde. I believe everybody has a right to choose, but I don't believe that anybody has a right to then take away collective rights on reproductive health and have women like going to that doctor in Philly that was actually birthing the babies and killing them at 7 months, and all these black and brown poor and a couple poor white women are dying because they're being butchered, and it's scary to be in 2011 and have women of color be thought of as subhuman at this point, because I feel everything is against us as women of color. Like, we're the lowest on every level, on every statistic. We're the least amount on mass media. If we are in media, it's the light-skinned Latina with the blue eyes. She can't even have black hair. She's got to have blonde. It's just, and we are the increasing number in the prison industrial complex as well as HIV. It's just, that's my woman. I'm very afraid right now. I'm very afraid.
Oh, what? It's a horrible movie. Precious is the highest
form that's
of
another
psychological violence. Second, maybe only the Four Colored Girls.
You got that would be called Tyler Perry, who's trying to remake Love Jones. Stop it. Tyler Perry.
Remember what Lionsgate Films said. They wanted to market Precious because they were looking to satisfy a niche market in white America, where they could find black films that they could market to white folks.
Not black.
Because they couldn't market Great Debaters and Miracle in St. Anna, because white people don't want to see black humanity on film.
So much.
Anyway.
Thank you.
You're not going to ask us our greatest MCs?
Oh, you know what?
I have my list.
All right, thank you.
What's your five?
I don't even know if I have it.
You're intellectual.
No, I'm not going to back out. I was just saying I didn't have it ready. I was just talking trash. Right now, I'd have to say Dead Prez is still up there. Skip Coon and Mr. Nick are my new favorites out of Mississippi. I love what they're doing. Despite, I know it's a wild name, but he did that intentionally. It's an ironic name. Skip Coon and Mr. Nick from Mississippi. And it's definitely, the name is definitely ironic. When you listen immediately, you'll get it. The first track I heard was, I do this for my women, the revolution, and my tennis shoes. And then, but it's deep. He goes, so Dead Prez, Skip Coon and Mr. Nick. Head Rock and Gotta See Us out of DC. I gotta put them. Their music is really moving me lately. I would have to put Invincible. I'm late on Invincible. I have to admit that, but I have to put her up there too. And
you already named 5. You know that.
Oh, I did. Okay, good.
No, he didn't.
I thought I only named 4.
Oh my God.
Who am I listening to? Like just this morning.
Lupe? No.
No, well, I can't claim Lupe, although I'm about to be moved by him. No, Das Racist? Oh, that sounds a great name. Let me just go ahead and say, I'll just say Asheru, just because I've been listening to him a lot lately. Another DC-based artist who's most famous because he did the intro to the Boondocks theme.
Yeah. Oh, he's great.
The kid who did the intro to Boondocks.
Yeah.
He's dope.
Mine is Calle 13 from Puerto Rico, of course, the two brothers and the sister. Deprez, Rebel Diaz, Lupe Fiasco, Medusa. Medusa, Mystic, and Invincible. I gotta say,
right.
my three sisters.
I don't know if they're old school.
No.
It's not old school.
I mean, I think Calle 13.
Y'all don't like anything old school.
Oh, yeah.
No, I do.
But I was doing more content. If I had to do that, it'd be like Rakim is for me. I mean, it's always gonna be Rakim. That's all.
I know I love you for a reason.
Well, I mean, of course, that's easy.
Look, the tension was there. We waited for it.
And let me finish. I would have put Immortal Technique, who's a very dear friend of mine, but until Immortal deals with homophobic lyrics and lyrics about women having things, and Saigon deals with a couple women issues, I'm not ready to list them. You know? You can't be talking...
We are multidimensional beings.
No, but we can't accept in hip hop a homophobic rants anymore that lead to young people killing themselves.
It was funny that you mentioned.
You can't. Now, there's a difference between if you're going to be in a freestyle, and I'm not even going to say the word, and cats are freestyling a cipher, and it's 20 y'all, and the N word comes out here, or the F word, meaning FAGGOT. Look, I'm not a thought police or whatever, but when you are a political rapper and you are amazing at what you do and people all over the world look up to you, like an Immortal who's done amazing. He's built 2 orphanages in Afghanistan. He is a friend. I don't take that away. But I can't have that in my energy space. And he hasn't been able for some reason to move beyond the rhetoric of violence against LGBTI people. So, but that's not an excuse when you know better. All I'm saying is there's some things for me in music are unexcusable because of the way they move the people. And I love Immortal, but when I hear the thing, I'm just like, oh, why? Like, why? I don't get it,
If nobody's familiar, there's one song, since you mentioned Immortal and you also mentioned the Young Lords. Joel Ortiz and Immortal did this song called Modern Day Slavery, which is hot.
Yeah.
But
thank you.
I'm sorry
this is awesome.
Such a small,
this is good. Thank you guys.
But I feel like we were privileged to be able to have an intimate conversation with you guys. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you to Warren and Elena for the second year of having this at the Center for Worker Education, and really just being different and having this is good. Good discussions are important. So thank you guys for your work.